Hello, my name is Arthur Champion, and I'm a retired vicar living in the Derbyshire Dales. I think most of us these days are aware of the growing crisis amongst the farming community. And in this video, I'd like to give some background and then reach the point of sharing with you 10 practical and pastoral ways that the church and others can support farmers. This is what I have in mind, these 5 sections, starting with my belief and that of others that God really does love farmers. In fact, about 70% of the parish churches in England are set in rural areas. And if we go back a couple of thousand years, the story of Jesus' birth indicates that he does love farmers because he allowed himself to be born in a cowshed of all places. And the first people invited along to his birthday party were the humble shepherds. Later on in life, during his ministry, Jesus referred to himself as the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. And that indeed is what he did. Well, farming is a way of life that is easily misunderstood. It's often portrayed as driving around in big boys' toys, enjoying beautiful landscapes, and caring for cute little animals. Well, the reality is that nearly all farmers have to work alone for long hours in terrible conditions sometimes, and they care for their livestock to produce the food that we all need. They also care for creation, to try and leave the land in an even better condition for the next generation of farmers who will take over. This crisis in farming has been emerging gradually due to various factors. For example, insufficient government support since Brexit, high investment costs, and low profitability. For example, I know a farmer in the Yorkshire Dales who survives on his state pension by renting out some of his 75 acres, which means he receives a government grant of only £2,000. He has a very positive attitude, as he says, we just have to make the best of it. Well, moving on now to the problem of inheritance tax. Farming families have traditionally been protected from paying inheritance tax on their farms through the agricultural property relief, which has allowed them to freely pass down farms to their children. However, the budget last October has removed this protection and threatens to bankrupt many small family farms, as well as driving farm shops into financial ruin as well. Victoria Vians, president of the Country Landowners Association, has said this: if family farms are forced to sell, the land will not just go to neighbours. Buyers may include corporations needing carbon offsets, local councils eyeing development, and lifestyle buyers. Environmental charities may also step in, using the land for ecosystem services, biodiversity projects, and new habitats. Unlike farmers, they will face no inheritance tax. Well, the government are playing down the impact of this ill-conceived taxation, whilst the National Union of Farmers claim that they've just got their numbers wrong. Meanwhile, we have this recent headline: Labour slaps a new tax on UK farms while sending £500 million in net zero aid to foreign farmers. You really can't make this stuff up. John McTernan, a former Labour special advisor, recently said on GB News that they would do to farmers what Thatcher did to the miners, which all sounds like a threat driven more by ideology than common sense and the well-being of the public. Well, moving on to the third part of this little talk: food production and caring for the land. The UK has an issue over food security. Did you know that half our food has to be imported and our homegrown crops are mostly harvested by seasonal migrant workers? I wonder what kind of a nation we've become when depending so much on non-residents to feed us. The latest government schemes are offering farmers short-term payments for tree planting, but then the farmers are left with fewer fields for grazing livestock or growing crops. I wonder how the government expects them to make a living. When the media refrains from trivialising farmers, as they often do, they then switch to accusing them of damaging the environment. Again, the reality is that farmers have a long-term interest in caring for their land. Many are accepting government grants to switch from producing food to planting trees or giving over good quality pasture land for solar panels and wind turbines. Have you ever wondered why solar panels can't be installed on top of office blocks? The Swiss have managed to do this for the last 20 or 30 years. Do we really need wind turbines that are out of character with the local landscape and are notorious for killing migrating birds? Even the Church of England is coming under pressure to rewild vast areas of land that is currently used for food sustainability. In practice, though, rewilding often just means reverting the land to unproductive and unsightly dense scrub. Just the other day, it was a headline that the government are aiming to remove 10% of agricultural land and sacrifice it for climate and environmental plans. I think the word sacrifice is very interesting. As people have drifted away from the church, the environment is becoming increasingly a kind of idol that needs to be sacrificed to, whether people like it or not. A very worrying development indeed. Coming on now to the fourth section. This is to do with carbon net zero. Well, in addition to the immediate crisis of inheritance tax, farmers are also facing a slow burning crisis over the government's plans to reach carbon net zero as soon as possible. This is a goal not only of the UK, but is being inflicted all around the world. And I believe the United Nations and the World Economic Forum are united in being a driving force for this to happen. I'm sure we all remember this young lady who appeared on the platform at Davos a few years ago. Many people took her seriously, although she has no environmental qualifications or credentials. The facts are that the UK is responsible for only 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Of this, UK farming contributes only 12% of that 1%. Nevertheless, in 2008, the UK set a legally binding target for an 80% reduction in the UK's overall emissions by 2050, compared to 1990 levels. The UK was the first and only country to have set a legally binding target. Some 17 years later, and despite frequent international conferences, no other nations have followed our example. As a recent headline put it, call that net zero, Sir Keir? Britain sent an astonishing 470 delegates to a recent climate conference on a 5,000-mile round-trip flight. The fear of global warming, or as the UN Secretary-General calls it, global boiling, is driving governments all around the world to impose heavy-handed restrictions on farming. Here's some examples. In the Netherlands, in Canada, and in Ireland. So far, the National Union of Farmers appears to be playing along with the government's climate change agenda. Take, for example, the announcement last November that Arla Foods, a Danish/Swedish dairy cooperative, is working with major UK retailers to experiment with Bovar. However, many customers are suspicious about adding a hazardous substance into the food that could harm the cows and contaminate the milk. Some customers have started boycotting the supermarkets, and gradually the supermarkets are listening and hopefully putting influence on government. Those pushing the climate change agenda have very cunningly linked this to caring for nature. A private member's bill recently came close to being approved at the second reading. It would have given the likes of Extinction Rebellion a legal mandate to introduce what might well become a totalitarian state, but mercifully, Labour withdrew their support just in the nick of time for unknown reasons. Today, I'm meeting more and more people who doubt the alarming claims of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The facts are that they only consider one factor, and that is human-induced emissions from burning fossil fuels. There's dozens of other factors which they do not either bother to collect or are unable to consider. Their statistical modelling has consistently exaggerated the threat of climate change, and our own meteorological office has been hyping up ordinary weather events by treating them as something unusual. It's often said that 97% of scientists agree that human activity is the main cause of global warming. But I've never once heard the BBC publicise the fact that nearly 2,000 scientists and professionals, including Nobel Prize winner Dr. John F. Clauser, have declared there is no climate emergency. Moving on to the final section, practical and pastoral care. The Church of England is committed to being a Christian presence in every community. This obviously involves caring for the farming communities. So here are some practical suggestions that you might like to consider. First of all, write to your MP about the new inheritance tax. And I can recommend this particular website where you simply type in the name of your MP and it helps you to produce a good quality letter, and it pesters the MP until they make a response. They work for you. Next, you might like to consider buying more food from your local farm shop instead of from supermarkets. There is another website here I can recommend called Farming UK, which lists the various farm shops in close proximity throughout the whole country. Thirdly, how about choosing food that's locally produced, organic, family-friendly, and fairly traded? Loaf, for short. Fourth, why not do your own research into climate science? Some of the claims being made are just ridiculous. Some of the videos are of better quality and more authoritative than you might expect. Number 5, sign petitions and protest against using agricultural land for so-called green energy. Number 6, why not get to know your local farmers? You may find you get a much warmer welcome than you expected. It's interesting to learn how farmers work with sheepdogs and in various other ways to get the best out of the livestock. Number 7, make contact with a view to actually visiting the farm. Obviously, you need to make an appointment. Whenever I've been along, it's been an education and a pleasure. You might like to freely offer them any of your relevant practical skills. Here's a couple of my mates, Alan and Pete, putting in a new guttering. Most of all, want to include farmers in your prayers, both personally and corporately. Add them to the intercessions on Sunday services. And then How about supporting your local rural chaplaincy? These are the guys on the front line who do a great job. And they have their own agricultural chaplains association for support. And all the agricultural chaplains I know are dedicated and trying to do the best for everyone in the parishes. Whatever your views about government policies, this is the time when we need to step up to the mark and do our best to support the farming communities. Thank you for giving this your consideration.